Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Script Supervision Masterclass at the 9th Indies Festival, dedicated to emerging filmmakers and film lovers, running with free sessions until the 30th of April, reaching more audiences with the support of the BFI, awarding funds from the National Lottery. We're really excited to welcome you to this event. Before we begin, I do have some housekeeping to go through. The event is pre-recorded, but we do have the chat function open where you can talk about the session, the festival, or the film in general, but do keep it focused. Don't say anything that's offensive or personal. We've also asked for some questions in advance for Natalie, so we'll be putting those to her in this session, which is very exciting. I'm super excited to introduce Natalie. So Natalie Scicluna is a script supervisor with credits on massively popular shows such as Sex Education, Peep Show, and Inside Number 9, among so many others. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you, Natalie.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. I know it's very, very valuable. You're very busy right now working on so many different sets. And it is. And I wanted to ask kind of in general, what is that like? Like, what is your day-to-day life like? Do you just jump from set to set? Or do you kind of have certain people that you work with and stick by?
I try to always give myself a bit of a break in between jobs, because if I didn't, I think it would be the end of me. It's an all-consuming industry. It's a particularly all-consuming role. Mentally and physically, it's long hours. Occasionally, if there's something I really, really want to do, I might have to do a bit of prep before I've finished a shoot of something, but very, very rarely, because I just don't have the brain space to concentrate on more than one thing. It occupies so much of my my time and my brain capacity. So yeah, I don't go straight from one thing to another, and I'm generally not working across more than one thing at any given time.
That's completely understandable, because I mean, one of the things about script supervision as a whole, from what I can gather, is you've got to kind of focus on the minute details all the time, and like be super hyper aware. So can you just tell us kind of what is a script supervisor? Like, what does a day on set look like for you? What do you do?
Okay. How long have you got? Okay. So it's a really difficult job to explain, and I think that, without meaning to do a disservice to anyone, I think there are probably quite a few people within the industry who don't really understand the role of a script supervisor still, and that is fair enough, because it is a weird job. So the easiest way that I've found to describe it is that you are basically the director's right-hand person, and your job is to make sure that all the words come out as they should, that the director, is getting all the coverage that they need for a scene, and that the continuity is as good a match as possible, so that the edit have as many different options as they can to cut a scene together. Because obviously it's a really hard job. You're never going to be able, if you're recreating something 4, 5, 6 times in different setups from different angles, to be able to do the same thing exactly the same every time, it's not really possible, because people are only human, and things change. So you're just there to try and make sure that everything cuts together as closely as possible, so that when they get to the edit, I think a director quite often has an idea in their minds about how they want to cut something together, but 9 times out of 10 you'll get to the edit and go, oh, actually it doesn't quite work the way that I thought it would. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually sit on this shot for a bit longer, or go here? And so if the continuity matches as closely as possible, it just enables them much more choice to be able to do that when they get into the edit. So that's how I sort of summarize the job, is that you're the go-between between the set and the edit. You're kind of passing on notes about things that the director really does like, or things that aren't usable for whatever reason, continuity or technical reasons, that kind of thing. So you're just sort of the eyes and ears of the editor on set.
Super. That's a really, really kind of very good way of crunching down such a massive role. And so obviously you are on set and looking out for things. Do you ever go in the edit, or do you literally just pass notes over and be like, I'm off?
I do. I try to. It's not a part of my job. I think in the olden days, script supervisors did used to sit in the edit, and I kind of think that's a really valuable thing. But it never, ever happens these days. I mean, it's probably not a necessity, because that's what they've got your notes for, and budgets. People just don't want to pay I think, well, they can't afford to pay to keep people on for any longer than they need to. But I do, particularly on sex education, which is one of my favourite jobs ever. And I'm so close to all of the team on that. I absolutely love it. So I do, wherever possible, try and spend time in the edit, which is really helpful for me anyway, because going off on a slight tangent to your question, one of the key things I think with script supervising is, as I said before, you're sort of never going to be able to match everything 100% perfectly, but it's knowing the things that do matter and knowing the things that you do possibly need to do another take for. And I think spending time in the edit really, really helps you get a good idea of how a thing is cut together, and the ways around a problem. So it's a really, really helpful thing for me, as well as being just really fun thing to do. It's actually really useful. So yeah, I try to, but it's not required of me particularly. But you do obviously have a very close working relationship with the editor. It's always nice to go in and say hi, put a face to the name as well.
Real life person.
Exactly.
That's super cool. Well, I mean, I've got 1,010 questions for you, which I honestly, I could chat with you all day long. But I'm aware that we've got some questions from our audience that I'd love to get through. Our first question from our audience, this is from Jessica Redhead, who is an aspiring script supervisor. They ask, what is your process involved in preparation? What kind of script breakdown do you do? And kind of when do you usually get involved in a project and who approaches you?
It's a really good question. Hello, Jessica. Also, any aspiring script supervisors may have noticed that my background has changed.
Yes. And it's about to change.
Yes. So it sort of slightly depends depending on what the project is, whether it's a film or a TV series. But for example, a kind of typical comedy, say 6.5-hour episodes, you'll usually have between 6 to 7 weeks normally to shoot that. And my prep time on something like that would be, if I'm lucky, 3 weeks, but more likely 2 weeks. So it's not a lot of time at all.
So short. That's incredible.
Really short. And when you think, an integral part of a script supervisor's job is to know the script inside out, it doesn't give you a lot of time, to get across it as much as you want to. So yeah, it's tricky, and I find more and more these days your prep time's getting slashed more often because budgets just seem to be tight always. But yeah, so in terms of my process, the first thing that I will do, and it's the thing that I normally get asked to do before I've officially come on board, is time the script or scripts. That's a really key thing that a lot of people are very keen to know early on, because particularly at this stage, if a script is running too long or too short, it's better to address it now than when you're in the thick of shooting things and suddenly you realise things are running really, really, really long. The last thing you want to do is get to the edit and find that you're having to cut out so much material for time that it's actually starting to affect your story. And on the flip side, if something's too short, then that's also going to be problematic, and you need to know early on so extra material can be written. So timing is the first thing that I'll do, and I'll usually take a day out of my allocated prep time earlier on to do that. And then the next thing that I do is my script breakdown. And that is a thing that will differ, I'm sure, from script supervisor to script supervisor. There's not really a right or wrong way to do it. I still use the template of the first ever script supervisor that I worked with, who taught me most of what I know. So I will go through and I will work out story days. That's a really important thing to work out early on. Costume and makeup need to know that as soon as possible. They need to know how many costume changes for each character they're going to need to organise. Same with hair and makeup changes, that kind of thing. I will work out whether it's day or night. That's quite governed by the schedule. And that often is a thing that changes quite a lot throughout prep when people are going on recce's. Sort of governed a lot by things like, you might only have a certain amount of nights that you can film in your schedule. But there might be a location that you think you'll be able to black out and shoot it during the day and pretend that it's night, but then you'll get there and it'll be massive windows all around and you realize it's just not practical to do that. So that gets tweaked a lot during prep. And so my script breakdowns also detail, so which character is in every scene. And I will cross-check that with the first AD in their schedule to make sure that we're both on the same page, make sure we don't forget to call in an actor who should be there. The next thing that I will do is I will go through every scene in fine detail, and I will break down any key props and continuity that are evident at this point. Most of that actually evolves once you've started shooting, because there are obviously things that will happen in a scene that you cannot predict or that you just don't know at this stage. I spend a lot of my time having conversations about whether people have their coats on or off. Really do feel like I spend a lot of time talking about coats. You know, these are the things that you work out as you go along. So your initial script breakdown is really important, but equally as, if not more important, is how your breakdown evolves once you are shooting. So it's also there to keep track of things as you go along, because obviously, you know, you read a script and you think, oh, well, it's obvious, I'll remember that. But then remember, you're shooting everything out of sequence. So you'll shoot somebody put their coat on in scene 3 at the beginning of your shoot, and then you won't shoot scene 4 until 6 weeks further down the line when everybody's brains are fried. And, you know, nobody can remember. So it's so important to keep really, really good, clear and thorough notes of everything like that as you go along. But, you know, everything that I can figure out from the prep stage goes into my breakdown at that point. I will also work out what time of day it's supposed to be. That's the thing that I hate the most, I think, about prep, because I really will sit and talk myself round and round in circles for hours and hours about what time it's supposed to be. So next time you're watching a program and you see a clock, know the pain that the script supervisors had to go through. Yeah. Work out what time is supposed to be on that clock. And everybody will have an opinion on it as well at that point.
Yeah, I was like, no, it's 2:30. What are you on about?
A bit early, isn't it? Drives me mad. So yeah, that's what I will also do. And then another main thing that I'm doing at this point is making sure that everything makes sense. So big part of your job is to make sure that logic applies, which it quite often doesn't, through no disrespect or fault of the writers, but they will often write specific things such as, you know, 2 weeks ago I did this, and then I saw him on Tuesday and it was 4 o'clock, and then 5 hours later it was 2 o'clock, and they write a lot of specific things that don't necessarily always track. So I will go through all of that and make sure that the timeline and everything makes sense. And while I'm doing that, I will compile a list of questions for the director and the producers. So after every draft of the script, I will do a breakdown and I will send my list of potential logic issues, or just general questions about things. So yeah, after every draft of the script that we receive, we go through all of those questions, and gradually you are able to piece together a mostly coherent breakdown of your script. And so any sort of little issues that arise while I'm doing that, I will put together a list of questions for the director and the producers. So at every draft of a script, I mean, usually by the time I come on board, you're almost at a locked shooting script stage, but not quite. So you might have to do this, you know, 1 or 2 more times if you're lucky.
and while on set as well, like amongst all of the pressures of being on set.
Yes, yeah. Well, you always sort of hope that during your prep period, you will get issued a locked shooting script, and then any changes that happen after that tend to be, you know, more like dialogue tweaks, that kind of thing, that don't massively affect the structure of your script, or, you know, huge new props being written in or things like that.
So what equipment on set do you use, and do you make notes on set, kind of on your scripts by hand, or do you prefer using a laptop? And obviously with sets, you've got field monitors and video villages. Is that where you reside and take screenshots? Or are you kind of in the thick of things, in the action?
It is a really good question. I've been doing it for about 10 years now, I think, and I'm just a bit too set in my ways to kind of unpick my process and learn a new system, because I've just been doing it the same way for too long. It's always in the back of my mind because everything does seem to be going digital, and I'm obviously all for using as little paper as possible. Me personally, I do everything on paper. So I have a hard copy of the sides, the pages that we're shooting every day, and I write my notes by hand. And I scan that across to the edit every day. I have the one concession that I have made is I now have all of my scripts on an iPad, so I don't have to lug around, 6 massive heavy scripts. I do tend to have all of that on an iPad, which has been quite a revelation. But yeah, in terms of my notes, I still do everything by hand on paper, because that's just the system that works for me, and it's absolutely fine if people don't want to do it that way. There are definitely benefits to doing things digitally. I think one of the things that I do is it's a peculiar thing to look at, but I mark up a script we call tram lines, which is basically a sort of at a glance for every shot that you've done. It's quite a strange thing to look at, but basically an editor can look at it and they can really quickly assemble the scene just based on the selected takes, because it will just show you which shot covers which bit of the scene, and which was the overall preferred take. So they can really quickly assemble something. An editor will always watch everything anyway, and then obviously things need to be tweaked and polished. But from that document, they can really, really quickly put something together. So when you are using a digital program, it does that for you. Wow. which is for me the thing that tempts me to do it the most, because that's quite time consuming. But no, I'm a pen and paper girl all the way, I'm afraid. In terms of your question about monitors, that's changed quite a bit, obviously, in recent times with COVID now in our lives. But I tend to stick by the director as closely as possible. It sort of depends on the location you're in. It depends on the director. Your relationship with the director really, really differs from person to person. Sometimes, they don't want you standing right next to them. A lot of the time they do, because it's just much easier. If you spot a continuity thing that's going to make a take unusable, it's obviously better to flag that early on than to waste, a 4-minute take or whatever, knowing that it's basically not going to be usable. So it's really, really useful to stand as close to the director as possible, so you can have a good kind of dialogue and collaboration as early as possible. So yeah, normally the director will have their own monitors, which I'll kind of share with them, and that will be as close to the action as possible, so the director can easily talk to the cast, get in and out. So normally I'm quite in the thick of it and quite close to the action. And then, but sometimes I tended to spend more time at Video Village, in the earlier days. I think before I built strong working relationships with various directors. Video Village isn't such a thing at the moment because of COVID, obviously. The last couple of jobs I've done, we've used QTake, which is a kind of video assist person, but they are, I don't know how it works technically, but basically everybody has an iPad. There's an app that you download and everybody will be able to watch what's going on their iPad, so they can socially distance. They can watch on their iPad what's going on rather than everybody just crowding around one monitor. It's kind of a great system, and I imagine it will probably even after COVID, because it just, I think, is really handy. It must be much easier for everyone than everybody trying to look at one screen.
Why has that not been like a thing
I know.
at all?
I know, right?
I'm going to be checking this out.
It's probably expensive.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
It's a great system.
So when you're on set, obviously one of the big things is making sure that when you spot an error, it's fixed. You mentioned standing next to the director during a take and being able to tell them if something's quite wrong or whatever. But what happens when it's kind of a small thing, like a prop that's slightly askew, or hair that just needs kind of brushing behind a shoulder or something like that? Do you go to the department head and say, listen, this is what I've found, or do you just go and fix it yourself? Like, how do you manage stepping on people's toes?
It's a really, really good question. I will generally never just go in and fix something myself. I have I've done it occasionally, but generally never before I've actually consulted with the relevant department head. It tends to be that the first thing I will actually do, anything that I've noticed that's not quite as it should be, I will talk to the director about it first. So at the end of a take, I've generally got a list of things that are wrong. So I'll go through all of those with the director. They will tend to say what they think needs to be fixed. There are certain things, the odd hair that's moved. Again, it's the thing I was saying about being in the edit. In terms of having a sort of half an editor's brain on it, is knowing that you will have other shots that you'll have cut away to. You're generally never sort of going to cut down the line of things. So the angle of props, if it's ever so slight, it generally doesn't mean that you're going to have to do another take for it. But yeah, so I would then, whatever it is, I would go and talk to the department head. So it's a real kind of team effort and a collaboration. Generally, say, I don't know, like somebody's hat's at a slightly different angle, the costume person will probably come up to me and say, oh, their hat was a bit on a wonk. And I'll say, oh, well, we did really like that take. That's the other thing. Like if you've done a whole take and something's not quite right, but the performance has been amazing, that's where it gets tricky. And in those instances, it's better to leave it as it is, because if you know that there's a good chance that the director's going to use a chunk of what you've just done, what you really don't want to do is then change it and then be cutting between different takes of the same shot with something, a hat changing angles. It's often better to kind of stick with it and go with what's happened in your tighter shots, because those are the shots that you're going to sit on more. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, a wide shot is a great establisher for a scene, but you won't spend that much time in it. So if things change within a scene, sometimes that's not the end of the world, and you just end up matching your continuity to the new thing that's happened. But yeah, I think etiquette's a really, really big part of doing the job.
Yeah, etiquette. I mean, because obviously with being on set, it's like if the whole thing is relationships and how you kind of fit with other people, and that's one of the things that I wanted to ask about in terms of your relationship with the director. You mentioned you go to them with all of your things, but what happens, how do you navigate that relationship with the director? Do you sometimes go to the first AD if it's kind of like these little small things, or do you just put it on notes and send it across to the editor? Like what's that process of working with a director like?
It really, really depends on the director. And it varies so much from job to job and director to director. I have sort of reached a point in my career and my life where I've sort of got a list of my favourites who are the ones that I really, really love working with, and I tend to just try and do jobs with them as much as possible, because when you find someone that you can have that great working relationship with, it really makes a massive, massive difference. There are these particular directors I really enjoy working things, which is just, it's part of the job that I absolutely love, but not necessarily in my job description per se. But it's a tricky thing. I think some directors really, really rely on their script supervisor and they really value that extra support. Some directors find it a bit annoying, which I can understand, because essentially you're the person who's constantly coming up to them saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and they just don't want to hear it. So it is a difficult relationship to navigate, particularly if you happen to be on one of the jobs where the director isn't so bothered about continuity. Some of them care about it more than others. And it's just, you have to sort of find your level, find out, how much they're going to want to know from you.
Yeah, I can completely see that. There's just certain ones that you're like, okay, I'm sticking with you now.
Yeah, Exactly.
So when you're writing your notes, one of the questions here asks what is actually on your notes. So do you have to put do you typically put if it was good or if it was bad? Do you need to put all of the camera information, or how intensive are your notes?
That's another really, really good question. And again, I think this probably differs wildly between different script supervisors. I personally, so the fundamentals of the things that I'm noting, I will note. So I'm obviously keeping a log of the slate number, the take number. I will log the time code that every take starts, and I will time every take. So I'll also put the duration of that take. Those are the kind of, the basic, absolute basic fundamentals that you need. And then anything that's unusable for whatever reason, be it continuity, be it, a lighting, technical problem, sound, anything like that. So anything that isn't usable for whatever reason, I will note. But conversely, anything that the director particularly loves, if there are any, particular bits of dialogue that the performance has been incredible in that take, I'll note that down. Obviously, a lot of my notes are based around continuity, so it tends to be a lot of, well, in this take they held this in the wrong hand, this take was a better match to the wide, that kind of thing. But I don't tend to write loads and loads and loads and loads. I think it's important just to put down, the essential stuff, because an editor hasn't got time to sit there and read War and Peace. They just want to know the bits that they can use. They want to know the bits that the director really wants them to use. And why I describe the job as being the go-between between the set and the editor. I think a lot of them appreciate any kind of guidance on how the director's thinking about cutting the scene. So if I know that there's a shot we're doing which the director is imagining is the way into that scene, then I will note that kind of thing down. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I try to keep a bit of a lid on it because, they just want to know the essentials.
Yeah, you could be writing for hours, just be like, this was really...
You definitely could. I mean, also, there's not the time, because the time you've, got your 2 minutes with the director and said, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and they've said, okay, let's fix that. You're turning over again.
You've got to prioritize what sort of stuff you're writing down. You mentioned about the fact that you are like the go-between for an editor and kind of the director, or the on-set experience. One of the questions that our audience has asked is, when you're on set, how much film grammar or educational kind of editing knowledge do you need to know? So it's often said that you need to be an editor on set, so have knowledge of like the 180 rule, how to cut things together, and eye lines. Are you relied upon for that?
Eye lines, definitely. That's a big part of your responsibility. It's also down to the DOP. I think between the director, the script supervisor, and the DOP, part of my remit of a thing that I need to keep track of. Crossing the line is such a sort of, it's like an urban myth or something. I think that everybody is like, oh my God, crossing the line, the 180. It's important. And it is a thing that you need to be across, and it is a thing that I am relied on to keep track of. So yes, definitely that. In terms of sort of film jargon and being an editor on set, those are just kind of things that you accidentally will pick up, whether you like it or not. Something you just get used to. When you're fully immersed in being on a set, it doesn't take much time for you to kind of start learning all of those things and knowing what they mean. But I think it's just really, really helpful for this job and this process to just have a basic understanding of how a scene gets cut together. And it goes back to that thing of knowing the things that matter and knowing the things that you do need to try and press to do another take for. And the things that really don't. A thing that actors have sometimes been said to do, and it is quite a clever trick, but it's just an example. If an actor takes their glasses off during one of the other actor's lines, the chances are that you're going to cut away from that actor and their glasses are going to be on. You'll cut away to the other person whose line it is, and then you'll cut back to that actor and their glasses would have come off, which will look weird. and a bit like a mistake. So it's the sort of thing, I'm sure nobody does it anymore, but it's kind of like one of those legends, things that actors used to do to try and get the camera to stay on them. So it would dictate that an editor would have to sit on their shot longer in order to show the action of them having taken their glasses off, so it didn't jump.
That's really interesting. That's sneaky, is that?
It's sneaky. But it's the kind of thing that happens, and people don't do it on purpose, I'm sure, but those sort of things happen all the time. So it's just sort of, it's really useful to just have a mind on how a thing will be cut together. But things like that are the kinds of things that are going to govern the way that a scene is edited. So yeah, it's knowing those kind of things that you need to keep an eye on and look out for, and the things that are gonna make a difference during your edit.
Yeah, and I guess with that information, because obviously you mentioned that's something that you do just kind of pick up when you're on set, and you just hear things happening and see things happening. But would you say that jumping on set is the best way of getting that knowledge, or is there kind of formal education or traineeships that you'd recommend for someone who wants to become a script supervisor?
It's a thing I get asked a lot, actually. I think that there are traineeships. I did a little sort of 5-day course, I think it was, at the NFTS. But honestly, I was very lucky because I'm sure this might be one of your questions later, I got into this from a production role. So I'd already had a chance to spend a bit of time on set. So doing that course didn't really teach me anything I didn't kind of already know just from having spent time on film sets. So I think it's sort of, I think a course is probably a good thing to do if you're coming at it really, really new to the industry. Then it will probably teach you some useful things. But I generally have to say that the most valuable thing is just spending time on set. Spend as much time as you can just shadowing other script supervisors, and shadow lots of different ones as well, because as I said before, everybody has a different system. Everybody will do it a slightly different way. So it's a really good thing to kind of observe how a range of people work, and then just, pick and choose the bits from each of those systems that you think are going to work best for you. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's a certain amount of theory behind it, but the only way to really learn how to do it is to do it.
Yeah, is to just throw yourself into it.
It really is, I think.
And well, leading on to that question that you mentioned is how does someone kind of start their path into the industry? Obviously, it's a very difficult industry to start in, and how would someone go about shadowing a script supervisor like yourself?
Very good question. As I mentioned, I was very lucky. So I started out in this industry in the production side of things. So I was a production secretary and a production coordinator. So I had kind of made a lot of contacts, and I've worked with quite a few script supervisors who I was then lucky enough to be able to shadow. If you're coming at it from outside the industry, it's obviously slightly harder. And it wasn't really the way that I had to do it. So I don't know. So I guess my best advice is, probably the best thing to do is scour the credits of a show, of all the shows that you love, get in touch with the production companies. I think it's all about just reaching out to as many people as possible. IMDb is a great resource. A few people have contacted me through that. Just, you've got to use a bit of initiative, and you've got to be persistent. You've got to be prepared for lots of people to probably ignore you. It won't be anything personal. It's just that people are really busy. And some people are just more open to helping people get their foot in the door than others. But it is a difficult thing. It's a difficult industry to break into. And yeah, I was very lucky that I was already kind of in it. But yeah, it's I think shadowing other script supervisors is 100% the most useful thing that you can do. So contact as many as you can by whatever ways and means you can think of. And yeah, do that and be persistent.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good piece of advice for the industry as a whole as well. Like that kind of, you have to be proactive to
You
be able
do.
to kind of survive in this
Definitely do. And
world.
it's an unfortunate truth, but yeah.
And my kind of, because we're wrapping up now, we've not got too many more questions from our audience. I just want to ask, what you mentioned sex education as being one, like kind of up there, but what has been your favorite kind of set and why? Like what is it about a set that makes it so good?
Sorry to every other job that I've ever done, but sex education wins it for me. That show just has my heart and soul. I absolutely adore it. I think it was a sort of holy grail of being one of my absolute favourite directors, Ben Taylor. I've worked with for years and years, and he and I just have the greatest working relationship, and it's just so much fun. The scripts are brilliant. The styling of it is, it couldn't be more up my street. The 80s, John Hughes, that is my bag down to a T. And just filming it is so magical. We're so lucky that we get to go to some beautiful, beautiful places. And our sets are amazing. Our production design is incredible. So that just everything about filming it is just an absolute joy and an absolute pleasure. The cast are amazing. The crew are wonderful. I just cannot speak highly enough of that show. I absolutely adore it.
I love watching it as well, and I'm sure a lot of our audience absolutely adore it too. And so, well done, and thank you for all your work on the scripts, because they're just so good. Can't wait for season 3.
For that, but
well, Natalie, that is all of the questions that I've got for you and from our audience. I just wanted to say a massive thank you for your time. I know it's as I say, it's very precious because you're just working on so much stuff, which is brilliant.
But no, thank you so much for having me. I've really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's a great job to get into. It's not easy, and I'd be absolutely lying if I said that it was. And there are definitely days, you're sort of in the firing line for a lot of people's tempers sometimes. So there are days that can be tough, but yeah, it's a really rewarding job, and definitely not your average 9 to 5.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think you'll have inspired a lot of people to look at this as a career path potentially for them, because it's such a huge part of a set, and as you say, it's a department of one that is so often overlooked, especially when you think about writers and directors and producers and camera people, but you don't ever think, oh, script supervision.
No,
but it's such a massive thing.
It's one of those things. Continuity is generally, you sort of want continuity to go unnoticed, because people only notice it when it's wrong.
If people don't speak to you, you're doing a great job. It's like it's fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Natalie. For those of you who are watching this in the month of April 2021, we do have the festival carrying on all the way up to the 30th. There's so many other events that are happening, so do check them out. They're all free, and carry on the conversation using hashtag Indies2021. That's INDIS 2021, and all of our social medias are in the link below. Thank you.